Okay.
I have to press OK.
And if everyone will mute except for Robert, that will prevent feedback.
For now, thank you. And if you have to unmute, something's unclear, or you need me to repeat something, just please go ahead. Okay. I assume everyone here is familiar with a patchwork quilt and these random things all over. And you're all familiar with walking a labyrinth, which is not a maze. It gets you to the center, but not all at once. In fact, sometimes you get really close to the center, you think I'm there, and all of a sudden, whoosh, you're back to the circumference. So keep those two images in mind as we move through Swedenborg and the inward turn. In the mid-1700s, Manuel Swedenborg offered to the world a remarkable and profound gift, the internal sense of the word. Not the objective, historical, literal sense regarding events from long ago and far away. Instead, it was a turn to the subjective, personal, spiritual sense, the inner life of the reader. His gift and the means of attaining it remains unique among the history of ideas, and we know that it went on to influence many people, as we'll see. Okay, Swedenborg and the inward turn, behold, the kingdom of heaven is within you. That's the theme here. He wrote that the Lord was effecting a sweeping renewal of religion in general and the Christian church in particular. He called it the second coming, in which the Lord is everywhere at work, moving to reestablish his kingdom. In this way, we can say that Swedenborg was himself part of a larger unfolding worldview known as the inward turn, a counterbalance to the world of scientists and who see the world as outside, external, mechanical, and materialistic. Inwardness sees human life not as a historical event, but as a psychological experience. So here we have this quote by Czeslaw Milosz, Czechoslovakian writer. In the 18th century, Swedenborg was not alone in discovering this strange dimension, the dimension of human inwardness. Others as well have searched for a counterbalance to the world of scientists, conceived as a mechanism seen from the outside. Different as they are from each other, in many ways, several thinkers have in common this search for the inside. Berkeley with his essay as Percipe, to be is to be perceived, Kant with his categories of the mind, and of course, Blake. Swedenborg's choice of states of mind and images as the foundation of his system was to appeal to romantic and symbolist poets for obvious reasons. Now, before we go further, we're not going to go to the next slide yet. I want to say a word about this word transcendence, which inwardness is a form of transcendence. And that's a word most of us are familiar with. One moment, we had a little bit glitch here. Transcendence comes from the Latin prefix trans, which means across, over, or the other side. And the word scandere, which means to climb. So hence, transcendence literally means to climb over, to go beyond or rise above limits. And for centuries, it has meant to rise above material existence. The drive for transcendence is part of human nature. It's about going to the other side of nature or the senses, finding meaning and purpose in life, going beyond appearances to reality, beyond externals to internals. The most tremendous instance of introducing transcendence to the world, of course, were the Jews. No longer the many visible gods of nature, immanent, but the one invisible transcendent God of existence, beyond the senses. There are two types of transcendence that I'm going to mention. Upward, which is common and accepted, and inward, which is less common and often held in suspicion. Upward transcendence, very familiar. It points upwards, higher, to God in heaven above us. Humans directed their attention and their hopes on leaving this vale of tears and rising to heaven and eternal joy, escaping from the dark to the light above. Now, this is an important and useful metaphor for spiritual growth. Taking it literally leads to a variety of problems. It leads to suspicion and fear of the body with its drives and passions, which prevent us from rising above to find a kind of pure, spiritually free life, free from the threats of nature and the senses. And so prohibitions and ascetic practices are employed to provide an escape from or denial of all that keeps us confined to lower worldly values. Or it clings too closely to the world, understanding higher as better. It sees obedience and religious belief and practice as leading to greater rewards and blessings from God. Think prosperity gospel. We see this in the majority of people who call in for prayers. What do they call for? Health and wealth, financial matters and health, things of the body. In both cases, the underlying worldview is materialism. One fears the material world, the other craves it. Inwardness. Like the drive for upward transcendence, the tradition of inwardness has been with us a long time. Hindu mystics, Essenes, Israeli prophets, Sufis, priests and prophets, shamans and sages, healers and philosophers. Some were celebrated as saints, but only long after they had gone, and most were condemned as heretics. Beginning in the late 18th century, though, inwardness emerged in a new light and took a new direction, down. I'm sorry, I kept my thing off. Down. No, yeah, we're going, hold it there. Now the direction was not high above us, but into the self, exploring the darkness of the unconsciousness, piercing our veil of fears and descending to the complex truth about ourselves and God, bringing light into the darkness. And so the kind of inwardness we'll be just talking about, it developed in reaction to the overly rational mechanistic worldview that emerged from the Enlightenment and the modern scientific age. And now we come to a brief history of inwardness. We can leave that slide up because I'm going to say a few words about each of these individuals. And I think you all know who these guys are. Martin Luther, who I learned in graduate school, is the origin of modern self-consciousness, not Descartes. His sola scriptura, he translated the Bible from the Latin into the German. Try translating the Bible from another language into English when you don't have an English Bible. Quite a job. Luther makes a clear break with the Catholic Church, which discouraged the reading of the Bible, insisting that their interpretation was the only interpretation. Now, with Luther, the individual can read and interpret on their own, finding their own meaning, as they are now able to go inside the story. And his sola fide, faith alone. Here, inwardness takes precedence over the outward physical realm of good works or behavior. Our salvation lies within, in the act of spiritual decision or faith. 100 years later or so, along comes René Descartes. Poor Descartes, so disparaged, so misunderstood. And I hope Rachel is listening for this one. I see her smiling on that big picture there. The cogito was not the dismissal of nature and feelings from epistemology. It was simply a starting point for Descartes to be free of the flawed doctrines of the Catholic Church. Think what it was like, the state of knowledge and understanding in the 1600s. Superstition and fear of eternal punishment were the order of the day. Descartes' method was that of radical doubt. With one move, he could do away with the uncertain confusion of the Catholic Church and begin to build an epistemology which led to clarity and certainty, clear and distinct ideas. The first thing he could not doubt was that he was thinking, but from there, if you read the rest of the meditations, he proceeds to reinstate almost everything we know as true and certain, including nature, emotions, and God, while leaving out all that was unreasonable. Descartes found certainty by going within and finding not the world, but himself. Now, the next person in this list should be Swedenborg, but we're saving him to last, as we all should. We're going to jump ahead to Immanuel Kant, who is very close to Swedenborg. In fact, Immanuel Kant, father of the Enlightenment, published his most famous work, Critique of Pure Reason, the same year Swedenborg died, in 1772. With the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant revolutionized Western philosophy. He sought to understand the nature of reason outside of space and time, hence pure reason, separate from nature. Reacting against the empiricists and the materialists, he showed the transcendental nature of reason. It's in place before our experience begins. Our mind, for Kant, is formed in such a way that we can only interpret our experience through its structure, the 12 categories. We are bringing ourselves to our experience, like it or not. We do not perceive objects in nature objectively or purely. Rather, it is the very nature of mind which is revealed through experience. Beauty is no longer out there in the object, but here in the mind of the beholder. This was an important step away from materialism. But as important and needed as Kant's philosophy was, it did serve to form a division between the mental and the material. Descartes and Kant elevated reason above superstition and dogma, but in the process rendered feelings, emotions, and subjectivity problematic, and along came Blake. Writing in the 1700s, Blake was one of England's greatest poets and painters, still is, an avid reader of Swedenborg. His complex poetic system took direct aim at both the institutional church of his day and Enlightenment rationality. Instead, he offers a third way to interpret human experience, imagination with a capital I. His fascination with Swedenborg's concept of states led him to elevate inner personal experience above outer natural or scientific experience. Imagination, desire, and energy define the true substance of human experience, with sense experience and rational thought taking a back seat. The meaning and purpose of life lies within each individual, not outside of us. And then what Blake started was something called the Romantic movement. In reaction to the rational systems of Kant and Hegel, the Romantics sought to reinstate feelings, emotions, and subjectivity to the exploration of the human condition through philosophy, art, poetry, and literature. Romanticism can be seen as a rejection of the precepts of order, calm, harmony, balance, idealization, and rationalization that typified classicism in general and the late 18th century neoclassicism in particular. That was Swedenborg's time. It was also to some extent a reaction against the Enlightenment and against 18th century rationalism and physical materialism in general. Romanticism emphasized the individual, the subjective, the irrational, the imaginative, the personal, the spontaneous, the emotional, the visionary, and the transcendental. That's from Wiki. We know the Romantics, more by and large, William Blake, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and Goethe, all big readers of Swedenborg. There's also Mary Shelley, Beethoven, and Byron, to give you a sense of what the Romantic movement was like. Sturm und Drang. Following the Romantic movement, fast on its heels, was Ralph Waldo Emerson. His key word was intuition, another term of inwardness. Emerson read a lot. I think he read just about everybody who was around at his time, but two of the strongest influences were Immanuel Kant and Swedenborg. An unlikely pairing to be sure, but not a problem for the wide imaginative thought of Emerson. Kant's philosophy and German idealism led him to form the Transcendentalists in New England, seeking a new kind of inner certainty independent of sense experience. And Swedenborg's doctrine of correspondences allowed Emerson to find himself reflected in the symbolism of nature. Like Blake, he was fascinated by Swedenborg's concept of states, or states of mind. And I should have put this in as a slide, but I'm going to read it to you instead. This is from Emerson's history. Everything the individual sees without him corresponds to his states of mind, and everything is in turn intelligible to him, as his onward thinking leads him into the truth, to which the fact or series belongs.
Mhm.
All these objects in nature are just sort of clues to our mind to remember who we are, to remind us of who we really are internally. I spoke at greater length about Emerson some months ago, and I won't go into it now, but you all know how deeply influenced he was by Swedenborg, wrote about him an awful lot. And he's the father, he's the leader of the transcendentalist movement, inwardness. And our last person on the list is Soren Kierkegaard, who emphasized the individual. He's also known as the father of existentialism. Now, he was writing in Denmark while Emerson was writing in Concord in the 1840s. Karl Marx was also writing in Germany at the same time. If I had a time machine, that's where I'd go. Kierkegaard deals with the issues of how one lives as a single individual, giving priority to concrete human reality over abstract thinking, and highlighting the importance of personal choice and commitment. Existence precedes essence. He describes 3 levels of growth that each individual goes through, and it's pretty clear that he's borrowing directly from Swedenborg's idea of natural, spiritual, and celestial states of life. He calls them aesthetic, ethical, and religious. The aesthetic life, where most people begin, is directed outwards. It's concerned with appearances and effects and nature. And it involves conforming to the world and doing what the world asks or offers. The next stage of growth is ethical. And here we leave the aesthetic realm and deal with issues of right and wrong, of justice, and more abstract issues of morality. But even this, for Kierkegaard and Swedenborg, was not the highest state human beings were designed for. For in the ethical stage, we still do a lot of good works and take a lot of credit for them. We are invited to move into the religious state of mind in which the individual confronts God, as we'll see a little bit later on, and begins a more genuine spiritual life. Kierkegaard also emphasized the importance of anxiety and the importance of free will and decision, which we'll again look at later. Existentialism is really important. I think it's the most important movement in philosophy and continues to be in many ways. We know all the atheistic existentialists, Sartre, Nietzsche, and Camus. We also want to remember all the not so familiar existential writers. Kierkegaard, of course, thoroughly religious. Dostoevsky, Martin Buber, Viktor Frankl, Karl Jaspers, Martin Heidegger, Friedrich Bultmann, Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, and William James, to name but a few. Most of those were readers of Swedenborg as well. So now we move, so that's my little historical review. And we're going to move now to inward terms very quickly. These are the terms, if you look at the inward movement, these are the terms that you will see over and over again. Notice that they almost all start with IN, meaning into, in most cases. Imagination, intuition, influx, inspiration, instinct, intelligence, insight, integrity, independence, individuality, and some that don't start with the letter I. Genius, virtue, spontaneity, self-reliance. But you can see that these are all terms referring to the inner person and the life they have inside of them. Again, not going upwards to the heights, but inward towards the depths. So I mentioned that one form of transcendence is to go up, another is to go deep within. And so we have the next slide. This is a quote by Emerson that I love. Happy was the day when youth first learned that above and within are synonyms. And this is where the break with the traditional church comes, because the church is always telling you, you do what we tell you and you will go to heaven when you die. You go up there. And the inward turn is suggesting, no, you be true to yourself, and you will start to experience the heavenly life even now. Which we'll see later. So then what happened? Okay, we left off at Soren Kierkegaard, which was in the 1840s, 1850s. What happened afterwards? Here's a little passage from a fellow named Curtis White. In contrast to institutional Christianity, whether dull utilitarians or fiery evangelicals, Emerson, like Blake, imagined that the world is held together by a spirit that is not of the church, and certainly not of reason, but of a direct experience of the world. Emerson made this romantic idea American, and he gave it first to Thoreau, then to Whitman, and through Whitman to Ezra Pound, Charles Olson, Allen Ginsberg, and to so many fractured movements of the recent past and present. The 60s counterculture, the environmental movement, and New Age spiritualism in particular. They are the heirs to the imagination's counter-enlightenment, with its contempt for the hierarchical authority of the church and its deep suspicion of what was unleashed by Enlightenment reason. With this move, this gradual progression of inwardness, the outward powers are disempowered. Teachers, priests, politicians, political leaders, and traditions all lose their hold on the individual and begin to lose their foothold on consciousness and how we define and understand ourselves. And so now we don't have in a few minutes, in a minute or two, we'll have another slide. But now we turn to Swedenborg, who we left behind. He was born a Lutheran. We looked at Luther. When he was a Cartesian as a scientist. You're very familiar with Luther and Descartes. I see this as part of his preparation for his own spiritual awakening, his own inward journey. But his revelation did not come prepackaged or ready-made. It required something of him. And just as upward transcendence requires only that we follow the rules, inward transcendence requires a bit more. For him, it was many years of intense introspection, dream analysis, experience of deep anxiety and depression, and work on the self through confession and humiliation. Think Dark Night of the Soul or Vastation. Only then could his spiritual sight be opened. Certainly, my opinion, no one went inward with more depth and clarity than Swedenborg. And then he became master of the inward turn, influencing, he got the whole ball rolling. All the people we talked about, and many more that you can think of, from Blake onward, were avid readers of Swedenborg, though they rarely mentioned him. What does Swedenborg say? In general, the internal is the cause, the external is the effect. The internal is real, the external is merely an appearance. Just as our body is in the outer natural world, our mind or spirit is already in the inner spiritual world. Just as our bodies are subject to both good and bad weather, so our spirit is subject to both heavenly and infernal influences. One corresponds to the other. And so we have slide 7, the next slide. Here's Swedenborg writing, it must be clearly recognized that the inner person is formed in the image of heaven and the outer in the image of the world, even to the point that the inner person is a heaven in miniature and the outer a world in miniature. A microcosm. And then a good one. Nothing is more important to a person than to know whether he has heaven within him or hell, for he is going to live forever in one or the other. And to know this, it is necessary for him to know what good is and what evil is, for good constitutes heaven and evil constitutes hell. And again, that passage from Luke about where heaven is. So John Lennon was right. Mary, you can tell Mary G about this. No heaven below us, no hell below us, above us only sky. But going within, oi, that's a different story. That's not easy. As Camus said, don't wait for the last judgment. It happens every day. It's an internal process. Swedenborg writes that the internal person lives within the external, and flows into it and directs it. See, again, all these inward subjective terms. Now we're going to talk about enlightenment rationality. We don't have any quotes, any slides for a moment, so we listen up. As Van Dusen notes, Swedenborg left science behind, but he continued to be guided by reason and the rational. The inward turn is not a critique of rationality, but of enlightenment rationality. As we already heard, enlightenment rationality is what we know as objective, mechanical, scientific, rooted in externals. It has no soul. And Swedenborg, on several times, Swedenborg, if you have a pencil and paper, you want to jot down Divine Love and Wisdom, 1949 to 1950. Two great paragraphs where he contrasts two types of reason. And he uses, now he's writing long before all of this was in place, right? Enlightenment rationality hadn't dawned yet. But he was talking about two types of reason, and he used the image of Ishmael and Isaac, story that happens in Genesis. I'm going to go ahead and read it. Ishmael corresponds to what Swedenborg calls rational truth, truth without good. Since such a person is morose, will bear nothing, is against all, regards everybody as being in falsity, ready to rebuke, chastise, to punish, has no pity, and does not apply or adapt himself to others. He looks at everything from truth and nothing from good. It's not a bad description of enlightenment rationality. It's a compact. Isaac represents rational good, as opposed to rational truth. This is truth conjoined with goodness. This kind of truth never fights, however it is assailed. It is mild and gentle, patient and yielding, for its character is that of love and mercy. And although it does not fight, it conquers all, nor does it ever think about combat or glory on account of victory. Two types of truth, one that is able to forcibly, force itself onto others and impose itself, the other who listens. Michel Foucault, the postmodernist in the 70s, talked about this in terms of the revolving door of reason. It gets you into trouble, gets you out of trouble. Reason is never to be dismissed or embraced too strongly. Quick word about misunderstanding. Just about all who turned inward had harsh criticism for traditional Christianity and great praise for God and those who followed sincerely. And they, in turn, were rarely treated well. They were routinely held in suspicion, criticized, or even condemned as dangerous to the status quo, which they were. As inwardness took a stand against the church and enlightenment, so the church and enlightenment turned against inwardness. Emerson has this to say about being misunderstood. Is it so bad then to be misunderstood? Pythagoras was misunderstood, and Socrates, and Jesus, and Luther, and Copernicus, and Galileo, and Newton, and every pure and wise spirit that ever took flesh. To be great is to be misunderstood. So if you find yourself in the minority, give yourself a hand. Now I want to turn to something that people in the church have been thinking and talking about for a long time, and that is the link between Swedenborgian Christianity and Eastern religions. Again, this is a topic unto itself, but I want to point out something about this because it's so popular. Oh, we're just like the Buddhists. Similarities are important, but differences are just as important. The Jews have a name for God, but they don't say it. Right? Hashem, they say the name. Christians have a name for God, and they say it all the time. In the Hindu tradition, there are many names for God. One of the most common and important references is that of the Eternal One. Hinduism deeply influenced Schopenhauer, Emerson, Theosophists, Ginsberg, Huxley, and Watts, and many others. And these people all celebrated the Eternal One. It appeared to be a clear response to the growing materialism and outwardness of Western thought, as well as a way to explore the mystical dimensions of Christianity. But as I said, there is at least one important difference between Swedenborg and Eastern traditions. And we have the next slide. This is from Stephen Anton Pacheco, the Swedish prophet, put out in 1995. He reminds us that Swedenborg calls us to interpret the sacred text as a narrative of the soul, a description of events that happen in the inner world of each reader. Then he goes on, he says, in Swedenborg, everything abstracts tends to convert to concrete and personal determination, to form itself according to dilations and expansions of consciousness. We are very far from a mysticism of the ineffable, where the individual is dissolved in the bosom of an undifferentiated absolute. And wouldn't that be nice? That is to say, the angel is a hermeneutic of a higher concept, living not as an intelligible connection, but rather as a personal experience. This is a kind of fancy way of saying that we remain, not only do we remain ourselves after we die, we become even more and more ourselves as we continue to live in eternity. Swedenborg writes, conjunction with the Lord makes a person appear to himself to be free and consequently to be master of himself. And the nearer he is conjoined with the Lord, the more free he seems. And the more he seems to be master himself. The closer we get in heaven to God, the more we continue to be ourselves. This is perhaps why Swedenborg was rarely embraced by those who knew the eternal one. But there were some who saw this similarity. We have the next slide. Some of you be familiar with this quote by the Buddhist scholar Suzuki, writing in the 1920s. For you Westerners, it is Swedenborg who is your Buddha. It is he should be read and followed. He is your Buddha of the North. And I have another form of this quote by someone else. What are you Westerners looking for in Zen and Buddhism? You better turn to Swedenborg. He is your Buddha. So believe it or not, despite our initial glitches, we're doing pretty well because we're almost done. And we don't have a slide coming up right now, but I want to turn finally to what happens. What is it like for us to go inward? Some of us meditate, reflect, use contemplative prayer or lectio divina, think deeply, or otherwise seek to achieve a semi-hypnagogic state. Put the world away for a while and go in. And when we do, we find that things are very fluid and alive. Ideas and feelings commingle in an ongoing formation of meaning. Now, inwardness seems at first to be simply an exchange of the objective for the subjective, right? This is hard and tried and true facts out here, and everybody has different opinions about it subjectively. Actually, going inward is something completely different. To do so is to find the resolution of the tension between the objective and the subjective. It's not two things where we pick one and reject the other. It's one thing, one life with two aspects or sides. Going within, we find peace of mind. We find the harmony of all that is without us. The duality cease to be opposites and become complements. So they're all part of one created universe. Going within, we leave behind the external props which support and reinforce ego consciousness, wealth, status, and reputation. Going within, we find God and ourselves. And the next slide. Here's a strange quote from Ludwig Wittgenstein. People are religious to the extent that they believe themselves to be not so much imperfect as ill. Any person who is halfway decent will think themselves extremely imperfect. But only, I should say, a religious person thinks themselves wretched. Now, what is going on here? Well, as I said, when you go in, you find both God and yourself. You find your natural and your spiritual identities. You find your infernal and your heavenly propriums. You find that tension that exists within you between self and God. And most people don't like to focus on it because the more you focus on it, the more tense it becomes, and the more the issue and challenge of choice confronts us. Genuine, authentic religion, inwardness, is not for the faint of heart. It involves examining both our actions and motivations. It involves confessing and acknowledging our sin. Now, not any behaviors we might have engaged in, but our condition of putting ourselves first. That's a state of sin, and it's automatic until we consciously address it. It involves repentance and reformation. It involves changing ourselves first before we go out and fix the world. It involves doubt, humility, and patience, acknowledging our ignorance and admitting when we're wrong, changing our minds. And as I said before, it also involves encountering, if you want, tremendous sense of peace and tranquility. We are each called to turn inwards, to find ourselves in the world and in the Word, so that we might truly heed the advice of Socrates, know thyself. Now, that's kind of an ending. Do we have a bit more time? Another 5 minutes? Okay, get the thumbs up. I want to say something more about existentialism. We have another slide coming up.
We do?
Yeah, we have possibly two, but one for sure. Because as I said, I'm a big fan of existentialists. And I talked about going within is not for the faint of heart. And existentialism does not make life easy, but it does make it real. And so I want to show you some. I want to show you 7 points which define what existentialism is, because it's a big topic, right? Everybody says, oh my God, it's so confusing. 7 points about existentialism. This is a crash course. You'll know it all. 1, we know, we are aware that we're going to die. 2, our death becomes our personal horizon, that point beyond which we can neither go nor know. 3, the distance between us and our horizon forms a new human form of time, psychological time rather than chronological. 4, the limits of time are finitude, present us with what is possible. There are some things we can be or do, and many more that we cannot. Faced with what is possible and what is not, we enter into the experience of choice and decision. What will we do? And more importantly, why? Having entered into the experience of choice and decision, we experience anxiety. The more conscious we are, the more anxious we become. And 7, finally, authentic anxiety leads to an with our false and true selves, our inability to do or to know. We come up to a limit. And if we stop there, we become an existentialist. If we continue on, if we push on from there to God, we discover theistic existentialism, what truly informs our life. And it's not our big plans from ego consciousness. Now, another reason I got focused on existentialism early on is because of a book that is unfortunately out of print. There are some copies available at, believe it or not, tucked away in the Lord's New Church somewhere in Western Pennsylvania. It's a book called Existentialism and the New Christianity by Harry Barnitz, a General Church minister in 1969. And this book thrilled me because he makes the strong case, and it's really well done. It's about 450 pages. That Swedenborg was the first existentialist, and he traces the influence of Swedenborg's writings throughout existentialism. And in many ways, this is sort of what you have here, because as we heard earlier from Swedenborg, we're going to spend eternity in one place or the other, and that place is within ourselves right now. And we would do well to get to know us, to get to know it. Okay, and now I will share my screen because I'm going to stop there. Before we turn over any questions, I found something just the other day that blew my mind. So let me see if I can get it up here. Inwardness. I'll share and then quickly zoom down. Here you go. Let me do it this way. Keep the surprise. Okay. This is from Sonny Boy by Al Pacino, just came out, his memoir. And then one night on stage, just like that, it happened. The power of expression was revealed to me in a way it had never had before. I wasn't even searching for it. That's the beauty of these things. You're not looking for it. I'm opening my mouth and I'm understanding somehow that I can speak. Words are coming out, and they're the words of Swedenborg, but I'm saying them as though they're mine. The world is mine. My feelings are mine, and they're going beyond the South Bronx. I left the familiar. I became part of something larger. I found that there was more to me, a feeling that I belonged to a whole world and not just to one place. I'm thinking to myself, what is this? It feels as though I'm lifting off the ground. I thought, yes, this is it. It's right here, and I can reach out and touch it. This is out there, and this is what I know now is possible. In that moment, I didn't have to worry about that after that. I eat, I don't eat. I make money, I don't make money. I'm famous, I'm not famous. It doesn't mean anything anymore. A door was opening, not to a career, not to success. And
You froze up there, Robert, for a minute.
by Strindberg. Does everybody know who Strindberg is? Yes and no. That's okay. August Strindberg was a playwright, and I think a composer as well. And here's one of the things he had to, yeah, here's one of the things he had to say. Swedenborg's universe is infinite and embracing everything. He answered all my questions, however difficult these were also for me. O restless soul, grievous heart, take and read. So there is Strindberg, a hardcore Swedenborgian, and Al Pacino is speaking his words and coming to a sudden moment of enlightenment and inwardness. I thought that was great, and it's time for me to stop sharing, stop talking, and see what's going on with everybody else.